Today is October 20th, 2011. My name is Roger Soyseth. I'm here with Tony Hilliard at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, where we are volunteers. With us is Mr. Mike Atkinson, a veteran of Vietnam, who has agreed to share his experiences with us during his tours of duty in the U.S. Army. This interview is being recorded for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project through the efforts of the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association. Mr. Atkinson, would you give us your full name and address, please?
Yes, Michael Harold is my middle name, Adkinson, and my address.
And would you give us your date of birth and a little bit about your life growing up?
Sure. I was born on the 18th of August, 1944. My parents were Harold Adkinson and Carolyn Baker Adkinson. I was born in Troy, Alabama. The hospital is still there, and I think it is Edge Hospital is the name of it. My father was not present because he was in England at the time, because I was born in August 1944, and he was actually in England with a unit getting ready for the D-Day invasion, and he was participating on that, or he did participate in that, and it wasn't a good day for him. But my mother was there in Troy, Alabama, and that was a great day, because it was the day that I joined the ranks of people from Alabama.
So you grew up in a military family?
No, my father, that was his only military experience, was just World War II and the D-Day invasion. He had one brother, but he was not military. So he was the only military experience in the family, other than a couple of uncles. But it wouldn't be true to say that we were a long lineage military family.
So what brought you into the ranks?
Well, growing up in South Alabama, and I've got to tell you that that was a unique experience in a little agricultural community, population 600 people, and I have several times told others and my kids how lucky I was as in growing up from age up until 16. I could actually walk out of our house, cross our vegetable garden into one grandparent's backyard, or go the other direction and cross over to the other grandparent's backyard. And I distinguished grandparents, differentiated them by the food they had left over from lunch. They were both good cooks, and I was a good consumer of good cooking, so I enjoyed that relationship and having them handy. Growing up in that environment, the easiest thing to do was stay there. That's what most people did. But there were a few people around who also kept encouraging you to look, or for me to be aware that there was a world outside of that little agricultural community. And I think the most influencing person in that life was my grandfather, my grandfather Baker, and I still count him as probably the most important person I ever met in my life, or the most important to me, not to the world, but to me. He was very influential to me, and the lessons that he taught are still with me today, and hopefully will always be. But he wanted me to just keep seeking a higher level in whatever I did. He was an educator, and I went to school in grades 1 through 12 were all in one building, and yet we still managed to be very competitive at the state level for basketball and baseball, and to do things that brought attention to us in sports. And when I was in the 10th grade, the next town kind of recruited or enticed my family to come down to move there because they had a bigger sports program. So when I did that, I became under the influence or in association with people who had higher visions, who had wanted to do greater things. In the little town I was in, I don't think I ever knew anyone who aspired to even go to college. But when I moved to the larger town, that was something that a lot of them were talking about. They're going to go to college. So that moved me, and I ended up getting some assistance for financial assistance for sports at Troy University. And I went there for 1 year, and learned pretty quickly that I wasn't ready for the academics, and I really wasn't quite ready for the sports side of it, and there were some flaws in their program. And in 1963, there was just a tremendous pressure on the draft. If you hadn't been in the military, you were going to have to pay that bill before any company was going to give you a very good job. So I decided, along with a couple others, to go volunteer for the draft, go in the Army, and that was the best thing that I could have done. It was a good move. I ended up being trained as an air traffic controller, being assigned to an airfield out in Fort Riley, Kansas, and sitting there on night duty. One night or several nights, I was tremendously influenced by a captain who was on night duty, and his name was Claude Ivy. And Claude Ivy later went on to become, or he retired as a lieutenant general. But when he was a captain, he really was one of the first ones to convince me that I had potential, that I could do whatever I wanted to do, that I could be what I wanted to be. You know, maybe I'd seen those words on a poster somewhere, but other than my grandfather, who I thought was a bit biased, no one had ever really sat me down and looked me straight in the face and said that. And all of a sudden, he really had me thinking, well, doggone it, I can go do something. And I ended up going to infantry OCS, and when I graduated from infantry OCS in March of 1963, I think I was the only one in my class who also volunteered or requested to go attend then Airborne school and become a paratrooper, and then go into Ranger school and be qualified as a Ranger. And when I finished that, or when I was finishing that school, actually is when President Johnson came on television one day at noon. When I was having lunch with a couple other guys, and I remember him saying, making his statement that we were going to deploy troops into Southeast Asia. I walked straight to the phone and called the personnel and said, okay, put me on that list, I'll go. And they said, no, you're on a priority assignment to be a training officer. They were really ramping up the basic training camps. And so that was considered a priority assignment. So I headed off to out to Missouri. What's the name of that little fort?
Leonard Wood?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fort Leonard Wood. And I was a training officer. And I did that for about 6 or 8 months, I guess, when I was bored to tears. So I went back. I went in one evening and I applied for Special Forces, because the only thing I had in Vietnam at the time was the 2nd Infantry Division and Special Forces. So it was too late to join that division, so I applied for Special Forces. And about a week later, I got a phone call saying, okay, it's from personnel, and they came out and got me in the range. Come back here and call personnel, they want to talk to you. So I called them and they said, we got your application and you've been approved. Go ahead and tell your commander you can start packing because we want you to report in 2 weeks. I said, great, so I'll be at Fort Bragg in 2 weeks. They said, no, not Fort Bragg. I said, well, you may have called the wrong desk then, or called the wrong lieutenant, because I applied for Special Forces. And they said, yeah, but you have 20/20 vision and the Army needs helicopter pilots. I said, no, sir, you have definitely called the wrong number. And they said, you know, are your heels together? Listen, you are going to be a helicopter pilot and report into Mineral Wells, Texas in 2 weeks. Well, I didn't think they could do that, but welcome to the Army. They could. They told me I was going to be a helicopter pilot, so I decided I better be one. I went to Fort Walters, Texas, and standing in line that hot March afternoon to process for a room in the BOQ, I met a fella named Frank Briganti. He was what I thought then, being from Alabama, I called him a damn Yankee. And he was quite sure that I was the most southern person he'd ever met. That was 46 years ago. You know, that guy and I are still best friends. In fact, he called me on the way over here this afternoon. He lives down in Florida now, but I was the first southern person he had ever met. He was certainly the first Yankee that I'd ever been caught talking to, and we were absolutely amused by our differences. And that was a good turn for me, because he was a great guy and we've known each other ever since. We went through flight school, and 4 months in Texas, and then 4 months at Fort Rucker, Alabama. We were roommates through both of those places. And when we finished flight school, and flight school was a great experience for me because I was back home in South Alabama. As you know, Fort Rucker is right down in South, well, that's where I grew up. So I was like 12 miles from my grandfather's house, and 3 miles where we lived when I was going to flight school. I could walk to my mother's house. So I was back home for the 4 months of flight school. And that's what it was. It was like being back home. And my mother, I think, tried to feed everyone in my flight class at one time or another. She was trying to convert them all to butter beans and okra. Some it worked and some it didn't take. But we had a good time. But what happened there as a result of that's relevant to this is when I finished flight school, when we all finished flight school, it was in November. That was the graduation month. Well, every pilot in my class was on orders for Vietnam. No exceptions. That's where they were going. That's why they were there. And it was one of those things we just didn't talk much about. We just did it. And but when class was over, when graduation was over, everybody was given 30 days vacation to go back home to be with their family before going to Vietnam. Well, I'd already been home for 4 months. So I just said, okay, I'll go ahead and go cut a trail for us. So I went down and did that, the very memorable moment of buying a ticket one way to San Francisco. Now, there's one thing about knowing, you're going to war, the war is located in Vietnam, you're going to travel by air, you don't mind flying in airplanes, heck, by that time we could even drive them, but there's something about buying a one-way ticket that just caused me a lot of grief. I just worried about that too much, damn it, I wanted a round trip ticket, but the Army would only fund a one-way ticket. So I bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco, and I got there a couple of days later. I arrived in the famous town of Saigon, and right out at the end of that airfield was what we all knew as Camp Alpha. Camp Alpha was a tent village, and it was an in-processing point for Army. I don't know if Marines and others came in there or not, but it was an in-processing station for Army. And I got in there early evening. Personnel tent was already closed down, but I went over there anyway to find some of the people who worked there. Because the troop talk on the plane going over. So, well, you don't want to get here, and you want to get here, and don't get here. This place is bad, and this place is good. Well, I gave thought to, well, what's bad and what is good in my definition? And I thought, I don't want to get over that. First of all, I didn't want to fly helicopters. I wanted to be somewhere where there was something going on. If I'm going to be involved, I want to make a difference. So I don't want to end up getting over there flying somebody around. Don't put me into a VIP flight detachment. I'll end up in jail. So give me some assignment that's meaningful. So when I got there, I walked over that personnel tent, and there was a couple of sergeants sitting in there playing cards. It was hot. They were sitting there in their T-shirts and their dog tags dangling and smoking their cigarettes and drinking that beer. And I went in with I pulled my jacket off outside so that I went in just with my T-shirt on too. And I sat down and was able to have some conversation with them. And one of the things I learned was I finally got enough friendship with one of them. I said, where's the best place for a pilot to go? He said, best place is down and fly along the beach. Go down and do the duty where the pilots fly up and down the beach looking for boats that have capsized or people who are stranded. And I said, okay, what's next? He said, well, he said, I know the unit you want to stay out of is the 11th Aviation Battalion. I said, why? He said, because they go through pilots like you would not believe. There's constantly requisitioning new pilots. I said, okay. So the next day I put my jacket on, went back and got in line, and I walked up, and the guy was surprised to see me standing there as a lieutenant with flight wings and all that. And he said, do you have a assignment request? And I said, yeah, I want to go to the 11th Aviation Battalion. He just started shaking his head.
Mike, when was this? What month?
That was December of 1966. Yep. And so I got a aircraft, they had courier aircraft, and I got on the courier of that aircraft and went to Benoit. That's where the Benoit.
Yeah.
That's where the 11th Aviation Battalion headquarters was located, and I did essentially the same thing there. I got there after hours, and I went and found the personnel sergeant. How many companies are in this unit, and where are they, and what's going on with them? And the guy said, you know, we got a unit here, and a unit here, and a unit there. He said, but the one over at Coochie is there in the deep stuff every day. And I said, what's going on at Coochie? He said, they're over with the 25th Division, and they just inserted them about a month ago. And he said, Charlie, the VC, really didn't want them there, so they race out with them every day. And he said, they're just always in deep stuff. And I said, fine. So the next day I go back, stand in front of his desk, and I said, I want to go to the 116th over at Coochie. And he said, you're crazy, but he snapped, you're on. I was in Coochie 2 hours later, and sure enough, that day they were in trouble. They lost a gunship, they had several aircraft hit. It was just one of those, it didn't happen for them every day, but every once in a while they'd have a black cloud over them, and that was one of those days. That night, I was assigned, or that afternoon, I was assigned a cot and a bunk, and told how many sandbags I needed to fill, because they were building bunkers, and everybody had to fill 50 sandbags, I think it was that evening. And I decided to go over and talk to the commander, because I wanted to be in gunships. If you're going to be in a helicopter unit, there's really two kinds of aircraft. There's the lift ships, they haul people and supplies. And then there are the gunships. They shoot rockets and machine guns. And that's what I wanted to do. So I went over, and when I talked to the people in operations about that, they said, come back to us in 6 months. They said, no one can go into guns until they've been on the ground here or been in the unit for at least 6 months, because you have to have a lot of experience to go into guns. Well, I lay there and I thought about that, and I should be able to come up with some way to justify getting in there a little bit earlier. So I decided that evening to go talk to the commander. I heard about him. His name was Patterson. When he retired, he was a major general, but at that time he was just a major, and he later became the mayor, I think, of Sanibel Island down in Florida. But I went in and knocked on the little half door at his tent, and he beckoned me to come in, and there was so much cigar smoke in that tent I could hardly see him. And he was very depressed because he'd had a really bad day. You know, we'd had 2 aircraft I think shot up real bad, 1 pilot killed. So he was writing letters, the letters to families. That's not a fun job. And I was interrupting that. And I told him that I'd come by to tell him, 1, I was new and I was in the unit, I was glad to be there, and 2, that I wanted to be in gunships. And he said, I thought you said you just got here. I said, I did. And he said, well, listen, this is your second tour, you're not going into gunships. And I made my case, because I noticed that he had a Ranger tab on the jacket that was hanging on the door. Well, it turned out we were the only 2 Rangers in that unit. And he gave me a lot of credit for that. And I said, you just lost a good man today. You need another good one to replace him, and I'm up to that task. He decided there in that tent to give me a chance. So he assigned me to go ride with another pilot that he trusted the next day, and I did, and I did well on that ride. So I was assigned to the gunships immediately upon arrival in the country, and I never knew of anyone that had that good luck before, or since, as of then. Because in most units you had to have a lot of experience to get in there. Well, that turned out to be the starting point of a whole new career for me. I liked flying guns, I felt I was good at flying guns, and I did a lot of things to change and to create new tactics for how gunships were being flown. When I got there, gunships didn't go below 1,000 feet unless they had target approved. Then they could break 1,000 feet and go down and go in to engage the target. I quickly learned from, growing up in Alabama, we did a lot of hunting of small animals. Well, if you're going to see and hit a small animal hunting, you got to get as close to it as you possibly can to get it with the first shot. And that same logic prevailed for me in flying gunships. I cannot see well enough from 1,000 feet to have my first shot be effective. But if I can get down on the top of the trees and go slow, my first shot can be real effective. So I started doing that, and that made a difference in our effectiveness with the troops that we were supporting and the aircraft that we were protecting as they came in and landed to unload troops. Now, one of the little bits that I got to tell you, loop back around and pick up again on my friend Frank McGee. He was from Connecticut and I was from Alabama. But when I left there, when I left the States, I told him that I would write him and let him know where I was and the benefit of any intel, anything I learned, I'd pass along to him. So after I'd been in Coochie for a couple of days and was sure that that was the right place, I sat down and wrote him a letter. And I knew what would appeal to him. I told him that there was this place called Coochie and didn't know how I'd ever managed to get there. But we were surrounded by palm trees, and there was 2 different ways that you could walk from there to get down to the beach, which was a desirable place to be because all the little seafood huts were right down by the beach. And I said, luckily, this is also the Red Cross Training Center. So all the Red Cross people coming into the country come through here. All the best bars and all the good seafood. This is the place to be. So when you get to Camp Alpha, tell them you want the 11th Battalion. When you get to the Benoit, tell the people 11th Battalion you want to go to Coochie. And I said, hopefully you won't have a problem. Well, I thought that he would write back, challenge that, or turn around and ask other veterans who had been over to Vietnam or someone who, or maybe he'd just look at a map to see that Coochie was not on the coast. Well, I didn't hear back from him. And then a couple of times, but I was busy and I didn't worry about it. But and over time I thought, well, he just probably threw that in the trash can. Well, I came in from a mission about a month later, and I walked through operations as you're supposed to back from a mission to give them your count, the incident count for the day, what you did, what they did, and hours flown, stuff like that. And as I did that and finished up and started to walk out, the ops sergeant said, wait a minute, Lieutenant. He said the courier aircraft came in today and they brought in a new pilot. And so one's here and he's pissed and he wants to talk to you. Well, guess what? Frank McGee had just taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker, and there he was. And I went over and found him sitting in his assigned hooch. And he was sitting there, and when I walked in the door, he turned red in the face. But he was so upset and happy because we were good friends, and he just wanted to know why. He wanted an explanation. And I said, because if we're going to be here, we're going to make a difference. We're not here just to log time. We're going to help people. And he bought into that 100%. And from that point on, even till to this day, we laugh about it and tell that story. But there was never a moment. Some people say, well, he should have pulled out a gun and shot me right then, and any good jury would have let him off. But that didn't happen. He flew slicks. He was in the 1st platoon, or the 2nd platoon. He flew slicks. He was Hornet 1-2 was his call sign, and my call sign was Stinger 9-6.
Would you explain the difference between guns and slicks?
Okay, yeah, the slick was at that time a Huey, a UH-1D model, and then later became H models, built by Bell Helicopter, and their role was they were built with a big cargo area, so they would haul people, haul troops, and haul cargo. And they had a door gunner, M60 machine gun on each side, but that was purely a self-defense gunnery system. The difference, what I flew was a B model and then a C model, and later Hueys, Cobras.
Yeah.
But we were built not to haul anyone. We didn't have a place for a passenger to sit. All of our cargo compartment was taken up by drums of machine gun bullets and rockets. So we had rocket pods hanging out the side. We had 40 millimeters frog units on the front sometimes, and we had quad M60 machine guns on each side. Plus we had door gunners. So we had a lot of firepower. In fact, we had so much firepower, and we put on so many rounds in those aircraft that when you're taught to fly a helicopter, what you're taught, and the only way to do it is to, what we thought, was to pick it straight up. You're supposed to come to a 3-foot hover, then you can nose it over and move on out till you get into translational lift, and then you're flying. With our gunships, and then that density altitude, we put on so many rockets and so many machine guns, because we wanted all the ammunition that we could possibly get. It would not pick up. The aircraft would not clear the ground, so we would slide it forward. We would just slide it until it would get going fast enough that it would start to bounce. And after about the second bounce, you'd hit translational lift, and we made it. Now, lo and behold, you didn't want to have an engine failure then because you could not auto-rotate because it was too heavy.
Yeah.
But all we cared about was getting it in the air. So we would bounce that thing into the air and get off. Now, Frank was flying slick, so he would be in the flight hauling out the troops to put them in. And a typical mission would be the night before we get a briefing of what unit we're going to be supporting the next day, where they were going and why. So it was every day, and they called them combat assaults, and that was a good name for it, because it was, they were loaded up sometimes if it were going into what was thought to be a truly hostile area. They might put in airstrikes and artillery, prep the area before we do the combat assault. But at least half of the time or more, they were depending on stealth. They wanted to go in, put the troops in without telegraphing in advance where they were going or why. And that was responding to intelligence missions where through whatever means they had discovered that there may be a cache of weapons or ammunition or supplies.
Now, what
hidden in a
units
certain
did you
building.
support?
Primarily the ones of the 25th Division, 2nd of the 27th Wolfhounds, 2nd of the 14th, but all the different, I think all 3 brigades of the 25th, at least 2 of the brigades of the 25th Division were there at Cu-Chi. That's right, 2 of them were, one of them was up at Tainan. So, and each brigade had 3 or 4 battalions. Some had 3, some had 4. So we supported their infantry battalions. And every once in a while we would get called to go off and do other missions. We'd go down and support the SEALs out of Nabe from time to time. And we'd go support the Aussies on some missions. Every once in a while, like Junction City and real big operations where they were going to mass and insert a division. We might go up to 2 Corps, 3, 4 Corps. We went down to Black Easter down at Long Bend. We went down, we'd go off for big operations, but day in and day out, we would do combat assaults of the 25th Division. Okay, so what we would do is go in for a briefing at night, and they would tell us, here's where we're going and why. They'd give us the coordinates, and generally they would have picked out from map reconnaissance a field they were going into, or a particular tree line they wanted to be inserted on. So everybody was to stay out of that area, of course at night you wanted to. The next morning the command and control ship would go, but it would orbit up at altitude where if you're on the ground you wouldn't know they were there probably, but even if you did see them, you had no idea what they were looking at until I got there. The gunships would come in and we would go in specifically to find that spot on the ground, that intersection of the tree line, that place where the canal crossed the pasture, whatever that landmark was. And we would go in at 50 feet above the ground, identify that spot, and then I would give direct, and look around. Is anybody in the trees? What's there? Who's there? Is there trouble? Or is it just people out farming? Or are there little people running around in their black pajamas scurrying to pick up their ammo belts? And we found some of everything. Sometimes we'd find kids playing, sometimes we'd find people scurrying around picking up their ammo belts. And we had different, if the fighters were there, we flipped and went hot, and we were doing our work. But a goodly number of the time, it was just friendly. It looked friendly, or it was nothing at all. That was the only one you had to be careful for. If there was nothing at all, you don't know who's in the hole or what's going to happen next. So I would give directions to the lift ships. They would fly the directions that we assigned to them, and we would land them into the wind if we could. But we would pop a smoke to mark where the lead ship touches down, and then they would begin their approach, and they'd come in, and lead ship, flight of 10 aircraft, 10 slicks, would land to that smoke. And ideally, they would touch down at about the same time. All the troops get off, so that they're providing security for each other by having numbers, and then all aircraft depart at one time. 9 times out of 10, that worked just like you'd want it to work in a textbook. Boy, that 10th time, or 1 time out of 10, was going to be trouble, and that was when something bad would go wrong. Well, back to my friend Frank, when something goes wrong, there's usually some cleanup to do. And cleanup can be going back in to pick up a crew who's lost their aircraft because the engine got shot. It's going back in to pick up some wounded soldiers who got hurt getting off the aircraft because they got shot. It's going back in and taking maybe a special weapon system that they didn't take because they didn't think they needed it. Some Bangalore torpedoes or stuff like that, the special ammunition. Well, guess who almost always took that assignment? That was my friend Frank. Because he had more confidence, I think. He knew he could do the job, and he knew that he was going to be covered, and I knew I was going to cover him, and the boss knew we worked together. And so they almost always designated him to go back in there to do those kind of assignments. And we became a really good team doing those kinds of jobs and those kinds of tasks. So I stayed doing that, flew most days because I was promoted from first just an aircraft commander to then I became a team leader, then I became the platoon commander, and I was a lieutenant, and it was a major's command assignment, but I ended up in that job because it was a good fit for me. And it was almost every pilot in the unit at that time was a warrant officer, except me, and I became the platoon commander. And we just had a really good team. And I've got, I would love to just right now show you here's the photo of that group. But that was a great group of guys. They have influenced me for the rest of my days since then because of their dedication to, that's where you learn, or it's where I learned about honesty, integrity, commitment, loyalty, dependability. If somebody said, if one of those guys said, I'll meet you at the rearming point with that part you need, you didn't spend 1 minute wondering, will they really be there? You didn't spend any time at all doubting whether or not they'd show up with what they promised. They made it happen. And they may have run into a lot of problems before it wasn't always easy, but they always performed. And it was just I got there at age 22. So I guess when I finished that career, that tour, I was 23 and should have been coming back home. But here's what happened. I got near the end of that year, and we had one of the infantry units, and it was one of the Wolfhound battalions, that got really into deep stuff out there one day. They made really hard contact. And what they were doing was they were crossing a creek or a small river, and they got about half the unit on the other side, and that's when they got hit by the ambush. And Charlie had anticipated that's what they were going to do, and they were being hit really hard. Well, we were there, and we came in and looked at and they were popping smoke on both sides. I said, "Which side of the river are you on?" They said, "We'll pop smoke." They popped smoke on both sides. Well, we knew then they were straddling the waterway. So we got down there and tried to come in conventionally, like we normally do, and look for them and then turn around and engage with rockets. But because Charlie was right in the middle of them, we couldn't do that. We couldn't use our weapon systems very effectively because those rockets were just not that accurate. I mean, they were an area weapon system, not a man-to-man weapon system. And so I couldn't use the rockets, yet they were taking fire from within their circle. So I got in there and took the helicopter and went over that little river right where they were, and I just sat there until one of them reported fire, and then we could see where it was coming from. And I hovered over it, and we started dropping hand grenades down into the hole. We had about a case of hand grenades in that gunship, and my crew chief and guard just started dropping frag grenades. Well, we took them out. That's what we had to do. That was the way we got them out that day. Well, that's not conventional gunship tactics to drop hand grenades.
No.
And that unit knew when we got there and they saw, and we helped them realize that they had the bad guy surrounded. They just couldn't see them, and because of the terrain, they knew they were in a bad situation, and they didn't know. Nobody knew for sure how we were going to get out of that. But dropping the hand grenade saved the day. Well, that made them very delighted, very happy with us. I'm getting right near the end of my tour. I guess that was that was late November, and I was supposed to rotate out of there about the second week of December. And that unit was back at Coochie a few days later, and they gave them a few days to rest and recuperate because they had taken a lot of casualties. So they were giving them a couple of days to wash everything out and to get some replacements. A Jeep came down to our unit, picked me up, said that unit, Bravo Company, 2nd of the 17th Wolfhounds, I think, wanted to see me, wanted Stinger 96 to come down there, and they wanted to give me something. Well, I went down there, and they had some parts of that weapon that were blown up, and they were giving me the parts of the weapon, and what they were really doing was saying thank you. They just wanted to say thank you. And the commander introduced me and said a little bit about me, and it was all nice. And I had stayed up about an hour and had a beer and a piece of pizza with them. And I was about to leave, and one of the soldiers came over, and he pulled out his wallet, and he showed me a picture of a very attractive lady holding a baby. And he said, "I've never seen that baby, but because of you, I'm going to see the baby, if you stay here and help me." But, the commander had said, Stinger 96 is leaving to go back to the world in a couple of weeks. And that trooper came over and he said, "Don't go back. You got to stay here and help me." I could not sleep that night. I stayed up all night long, just thinking about that. And the next day, I went down and extended. I stayed 6 more months. And then at the end of that, I stayed 6 more months. I was committed to, and saw my role, my purpose was to serve those soldiers. And that's what I was going to stay there and do.
Wow.
So that was what that beer and the pizza that afternoon with that infantry unit. I've sometimes thought about that many times thereafter. That was the most expensive, in some ways, the most expensive beer, although I didn't have to pay for it. But Spec 4 Garcia, who's the fellow who showed me his family, and he kind of hooked my heart and my willingness to stay and help. And when I extended that time, and the deal was, if you had agreed to stay 6 more months, because the Army needed people. I mean, they just needed soldiers, needed pilots. They had a lot of jobs. So if a pilot or anyone else, I think, agreed to voluntarily stay 6 more months, then their deal was you could have 6 months, you could have 30 days of vacation, leave, and a round-trip ticket anywhere in the free world you want to go. So I said, that's okay, I'll do that. I'll go to Sydney, Australia. And then it wasn't an R&R center, so I was ahead of the pack. That was in 64. So I went to Sydney, Australia, and the day I got there, I met a guy named Ted McCarowitz, who was a captain, and I was a captain by then. He was a captain in the Air Force, and he and I were both there for 30 days. And we stayed in the Coogee Bay Hotel down on Coogee Beach in Sydney, Australia, and December is their summer. So we had a fantastic 30 days of great relaxation, and the Australian people loved Americans, and we loved Australians, so it couldn't have been any better in terms of just enjoying ourselves and being away from combat for a month. Now, my mother would not have described it that way, because one, she certainly didn't agree with me extending, and she absolutely had trouble with the fact that I had chosen to go to Australia rather than come back to the butter beans and the okra. But I did. I went back then to the unit and served another 6 months, and by this time I had learned more. I hate to say I was smarter. The place was becoming real familiar to me. If I went out in the morning then, every morning I went out, I knew if something had been moved. It was like my backyard. I understood if there were 2 new boats on the river parked over in the trees, somebody was there. I was really good at gathering intelligence and noticing change, because change is what signaled something happened last night out here.
And if a new guy came in to take your place, these things wouldn't be noticed.
Those little nuances would be gone. Well, the units appreciated that, my bosses appreciated that, and I truly was complimented, I guess, for that. And as a result, I was also in the thick of it an awful lot of times, so I ended up with an awful lot of missions flown, an awful lot of medals. I have, I don't remember how many. I think air medals, I have 72 clusters on my air medal, and that's 25 combat hours for each of those clusters. I have silver stars and lots of distinguished flying crosses and all that kind of stuff, and that was largely because just almost every day I was getting out and getting in the middle of it. Well, at the end of that 6 months, I knew how much I was needed, so I didn't have to have an emotional experience to extend. I just said, yes, I'll stay another time, but I'm going home this time. So I took 30 days and came back to South Alabama to get the butter beans and the okra and to be with family, which I needed and wanted to do. But there was something different now. When I came home, my friends and I would go out, and go out and socialize, and I noticed that I would be introduced to somebody I didn't know. And they call me Mickey. My nickname growing up in that little town was Mickey. They'd introduce, here's Mickey, he's back from Vietnam, or he's on his way back to Vietnam, or something like that. Vietnam would be in the sentence. And the reaction from the people I was being introduced to was just almost like I had some kind of disease. They didn't want to touch me. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. They didn't like me. They would say things negative. My friends overlooked the Vietnam stuff because they knew me. They liked me. I was their friend. I was their buddy. I was their cousin. I was their former football roommate or teammate. But meeting other people, they couldn't let go of the fact that if you're connected with Vietnam, then you've got to be bad. And that was just a real shock to me. I was disappointed in that. I was surprised at that. And then I started watching the news every night, and I better understood why they were upset, because the news people were putting it down. And I would sit there and watch the news and knew that they were not telling the truth. They were grossly exaggerating reality that was going on over there. I put up with that for about 3 weeks. I was supposed to stay home for 30 days. But after about 3 weeks, I told my family that I needed to go back. And I just packed up my bags and went down and caught a flight and went back there. And I think that may have been a first to get back in early, but I took good advantage of that. Till as soon as I got back, my boss said that he needed to fill a quota for somebody to go to the survival school, escape and evasion pilot Air Force course over in the Philippines. So he threw my name on the list. And next 10 days I was chasing around in the jungles of the Philippines trying to keep from being caught by the people they had hired to try to catch you while you escaped and evade and ate snakes and rice. But that was okay. I went back and it was back in the role. They put me in the operations officer position, and I did all the things that I needed to be doing, and I had a lot of experience, and I had just the experience of working with people that you knew, that you trusted, and you had confidence in was just probably still to this day turns out to be one of the most satisfying things. Was it dangerous? Yeah. Did you think much about that? No. What you did was you just enjoyed being a part of a team, of a unit that was getting something done. You were clear about what you were doing, and you took pride in how well you did it. Now, I look back on that and say, I wish I could have seen more of that in my roles and environments since then. And it was like a study of leadership, because I had 5 different commanders during the years that I was in Vietnam, and they were 4 of them were among the best commanders that I've ever known. And leaders. They were just really good leaders. A couple of the ones that I worked for in my Army career after Vietnam were Gary Luck, who retired as a 4-star general, and he was my boss a couple of times, and I was the operations officer for Colin Powell, when Colin Powell was the commander of the 2nd Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division. And that was a great experience. They were good leaders. I learned a lot from them. And from my military career of 20 years, I think the best thing that came from it, or among the greatest things that came from it, that I wish other young men could have that same opportunity, was the training and the exposure to leadership. They just don't get that in any other environment that I'm aware of. Now, there are a few corporations in our great country who do have a little bit of a good reputation for providing training. But I've seen those corporations up close, and they do not have the same reputation for leadership that the military has. So I'm not sitting here making a recruiting tape. I'm sitting here telling you my real experiences. But if any young man who's about 18 or 19 or 20 ever does look at this and say, wonder what I ought to do with my life, I say give the military a look, because it's the best training and the best leadership that's available anywhere. And that's, if there are good points and bad points about Mike Adkinson, and I'll bet there are, I'd say that most of the good points were developed, honed, and put into pretty good shape by either my grandfather Baker or leaders in the Army, because those are the instructive forces, probably in terms of physical people, that I have known in my life. So I enjoyed that, and that's been good. Now, what else would be relevant? The Army said, okay, you're back from Vietnam, what are we going to do with you? You served, they gave me credit for 3 tours. They didn't want to send me back into Vietnam anymore. And we were getting on the backside of that bubble anyway. So they started sending me to schools. I went to fixed wing school, I went to multi-engine school, I went to career course. They sent me back they told me I could go back to college on their nickel. I chose and went to Auburn University, got a degree there. Later, years later, they sent me for special educational courses at Columbia University in New York. So the Army gave me lots of educational opportunity. I went to Command and General Staff College, so lots of schools, a lot of opportunities for me to learn skills and worldly and knowledge that was available are good for me no matter where I was going to be. So the military was a good experience. The relationships developed there were probably the most meaningful that I have known. And it's a part of why I'm still, I guess, sort of coming around and eating noodle salad with the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association. Is not because I've had a lifetime relationship with those particular people. It's just sort of like when I'm there, I know they know what I know. I know that they too had experiences similar to what I did in their own world, and that there's just a little bit of camaraderie that kind of feels good to belong. So that's been my military career. I exited. I retired. The Army was being really good to me. They gave me early promotion to lieutenant colonel, and were encouraging me to keep moving. I was selected to be a battalion commander at Fort Hood, Texas. And I don't know where the end of the track would have been. The guys I was sort of peer paired with during those years went on to accomplish great things. But I was here in Atlanta when I hit my 20-year mark at Fort McPherson. I had 2 daughters, and they were running along 3 and 5, 4 and 6. And to pull them up and move again was, I thought, a little bit of a negative. I hated to keep moving them around. Plus, the Army there was nobody to fight then. If you remember back 1983, we had the Cold War going. And there was you couldn't pull the pin out of a hand grenade anywhere. There was nothing going on. And I'm thinking, okay, the Army is not necessarily the best place, not the most adventurous place to be when there's no war going on. So I thought, and at the time, I really couldn't see where another war was going to come from. I'd listened to the intel people, and there was we really didn't think the Russians were ever going to show up on the East Coast and try to march across the country. So I didn't know where in the world, I don't think we need a military anymore. There's nobody to fight. So I went ahead and retired. And that wasn't many years after that they did find a reason to go get in another little skirmish, and now they're overloaded with things to do. But during those years, they were getting quiet. We were spending all our time training, and we really didn't have a good scenario for who we were going to need to fight again. So it was getting a little bit boring, so I left.
What year did you retire?
83, March of 83. And if you'll go back and look at the number of combat assaults run in 1983, I think the number is 0. So it was just quiet times in the Army, and I needed something a little more exciting. So I just came downtown, pulled off the uniform, put on, went down and bought a suit and a white shirt, and until I figured out what to do, I started just calling myself a leadership consultant. And that worked fine. I got into some really neat places, and once I got in, I learned a lot about business, and I have enjoyed learning and enjoyed being a part of those things here in this community and in others ever since. And this is now what I call home, Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm starting to redefine that to say it's more becoming Blairsville, Georgia, because I'm really enjoying now starting to slow down and be up there in the North Georgia mountains, and every once in a while catching a nice fish out of Lake Notley and putting it on the grill and getting in our Jeep riding around. But this has been, as I'm sitting here now, starting to get to it, said, okay, I wanted to tell my Vietnam story, and there's probably lots more little nuances and incidences there that I could go back and bore you to tears with, but there's enough there just to give you a feel for at least the view that I had when I was going through it and where I am now. And I'm getting toward the last chapter. I think I'm 67 years old. I tell people I'm 84 consistently, so that's why I'm a little, I have to stop and think about how old am I really. I adopted the age 84 about 5 years ago, and it works really good for me, because when
Everybody
age
tells
comes
you how
up,
young you look.
that's right. That's right. I did that accidentally about 5 years ago in a sales meeting. A lady said, a young lady, she was maybe 24 years old, she said something that could have been derogatory about sick people in their 50s and 60s. I said, people in their 50s, 60s like that product. She said, oh no, they just don't get it. And then she said, oh my goodness, I've offended you. I said, heavens no. I said, I'm 84 years old. And I agree with you. When I was 50 or 60, I wouldn't have gotten it either. But at 84, I can get it now. She said, okay. And she said, you are absolutely the best looking 84-year-old man I've ever seen. And I became 84 that day. I use it consistently and I get the same results. Well, you sure do look good. And if I told them the truth, if I told them I'm 67, they would just say, well, fine. But 84, really? That's good. So at age 84, I'm looking back over my life saying, I'm real proud of the opportunity that I had to grow up in Mr. Richard Baker's adjoining backyard and to be his grandson. And 20 years in the Army, serviced the country, but I was really serving the guys that I was working with. And I was in the cockpit with, or the foxhole with. And that's how I had back, you remember my story, I didn't want to go to flight school, so I had to make that adjustment. I convinced myself that what the helicopter was a mobile foxhole. And if I treated it and thought of it like a mobile foxhole, then that's okay. I could go back and just get in my mobile foxhole every day and go to where the war was, go out to where the combat was. And that's what I wanted to do, and that worked for me. But I learned a lot, I experienced a lot, I've been a lot of places. I have been to lots of places in the world, and that wouldn't have been available to me had I stayed in South Alabama. And I have nothing wrong with South Alabama, nothing against South Alabama. It's just that I didn't need to stay there. And I needed to get out and go do other things. And the military became my way to do it. It provided me an avenue and an opportunity and exposure to leaders and to good people who took good care of me. And I love this country, and I love the opportunities that I've had, and I appreciate you guys for giving me this opportunity to come sit and tell you about it.
Well, I was going to try to ask you for your final thoughts, but I guess we just got them. Okay, sir, was there anything you wanted to say in closing?
No, I don't know. I'm not thinking of anything that was an old boy. I thought we'd get on to that one. I could talk about kids and grandkids and fishing, but I think what I was wanting to talk about is me and my experiences, and I'm comfortable that I've done that.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you very much. This has been a real pleasure hearing your story.
Thank you for your service. Welcome home.
Thank you.